Hello there. I posted up a video asking people what swords for my collection, or the swords that I'd filmed anyway, they would like to see more of or see a review of. And one of the things that kept coming up, other than saying please review your Swiss sabre, which I've just done, was to do with the longswords. And one question in particular was the Albion longswords. So I've got two of them here. I'll just turn around and grab them. So this is the first one. So this is the Albion Meyer, and I'll just pop it down. Easy now. And this is the Albion Liechtenauer. So just pop that one down as well. Now, both of those swords I bought a very long time ago. The AHF, right from its beginning, was a steel-based club. So back in 2006, when people were sort of, I'm going to stop looking at that camera now. Well, stop looking at the screen, I'm going to look at the lens. I'll do my best. So back when we started, we were using kind of the lightest and most flexible steel we could. Okay, easy now, little fella. Okay, the perils of doing everything in one take. Now, where was I? Okay, started the AHF. So right back, sort of 2006, we were using steel flexible swords. So most of them were from, in fact, all of them came from reenactment suppliers, which I appreciate is far from ideal, and we don't use them now. But back in 2006, and that wasn't even when we started, but that was when our club officially started. That was the safest steel that you could get your hands on. Other groups were using shinai and weighted down, various types of buffers and all kinds of strange stuff. It was that kind of early phase of experimentation in equipment in terms of what you could use. But we were very much, right from the start, as I said, a steel-based club. So we went for relatively strong protective gear, sort of as strong as there was available at the time anyway, and augmented usually. And we just had to manage with what we could find. So of course, as you even today with, say, feathers, you fight according to the armor, so the protective gear and the weapons you're using. So we had to tone it back a bit, which of course with things like buffers, you could go in harder. That was just a consequence of going for steel, and we just wanted steel. So we had all these different types of swords that we were using. None of them were particularly ideal. And then news came out that Albion Swords in the US was starting a new line of swords, which I believe they call their Maestro range. And the very first sword that was going to be made was the Liechtenauer. Now, when it was announced, I put in an order right at the start. So my Liechtenauer is, I don't know whether it's the very first batch, but it was right at the start when they first came out. And this chap here, which you'll notice is looking old and battered and has been rewrapped twice. And it really is, it looks like an old relic, because it is an old relic. So I bought this sword, I shipped it from the US, because back when they were first released, there was no Albion Europe, and that came later, and of course, and then it went again. So I ordered this sword, and believe it or not, when it arrived, it was the lightest, most flexible, and fastest of the steel longswords that we had in the AHF, which is strange looking back, because that's not what it is anymore. And it arrived, and everything about it's quite minimalistic in look. It has sort of like a cotton wrap. I've got it still on the Meyer, so I'll show you in a moment. But it's got the standard wrap, well, it would have the standard wrapped crossguard. And then they all came out roughly the same, looking like this. Now, once I started using it, it did start to take a little bit of edge damage. Bear in mind that we weren't using these against other sort of HEMA-suitable weapons because they didn't exist. So we were using these against sort of light, flexible swords from places like Armor Class. So I don't know whether you can see. Let me just check and make sure we're in. Yeah, have a look. There we go. I think it's the reflection is being a bit of a git. I'm just going to pause this and try again. Okay, no, apparently it is all working fine. So you can see the blade there. I'm just trying to show you where the edge is worn. Come on. There we go. Now, there are marks on this blade where it needs to be cleaned. Lots of my swords are due for some attention before we go back to fencing. This isn't one of them. It'll get cleaned up because it only comes out for drill now. So anyway, so this sword came out, looks great. I really liked it. It handles like a longsword as opposed to a feather. It's got a little bit of safe flex. When people are wearing things at least as protected as an AP jacket, and ideally something slightly meatier, they feel quite safe. Back when we first used them, nobody tipped these kinds of swords. It's not spatulated at the end, it's just rounded. Subtle hint, tip it. Back when we first started, we didn't tip them. I've heard many accounts of these penetrating armour and people. In terms of, okay, that sounds much worse probably than it is. In terms of going through gloves and piercing into the hand, I actually had the Albion Meyer go through my forefinger and thumb the week before the Dren event, one of the first ones we went to, which is why there are some photos of me walking around with a bandaged hand, because it stabbed into my hand. And of course, some jackets it's gone through in the past as well. So definitely tip, not just your Albions, but any swords that are not really heavily protected on the tip. Put some kind of protection on them and talk to your instructors and find out basically what the rules are in your club. But anyway, back to this sword. So it handles really nicely. It was lighter and faster than all the other reenactment weapons out there. So it kind of started that first phase of HEMA-specific weapons. So yeah, brilliant, like it. My brother Nick Thomas, he ordered one, he got one, completely different to my one. So although it was the same sword, the handling was completely different. It was heavier, and it hit a lot harder than my sword. And Nick really didn't like it. He got rid of it quite early on. And then we both went to the Albion Meyers, which bizarrely, it's a slightly longer sword, but in fact I believe it is. Let me just check. Yes. So the Albion Meyer is longer in the blade and longer in the grip. And yet when I spar with it, it feels shorter in every way. Now it has a shilt, but that doesn't actually physically alter the length of the sword. Oh, a little bit of a rattle as well. So the shilt doesn't change anything in terms of the length of the weapon, and yet it does feel, it does to me anyway, it feels like a shorter weapon. Now the flex on the Meyer is better than the flex on the Liechtenauer. Now this was one of the first sort of generation of feathers, made to be like a historical recreation of a feather. And it handles in a similar fashion to modern feathers. It's nice. I find the crossguard way too long. If I compare it to the Liechtenauer, something behind it, there we go. It doesn't seem much, but anybody that's been sparring for a while will know that there's a sweet spot between aesthetics and protection, and it just getting in the way. I find the Albion Liechtenauer, no matter which gloves I use, never gets in the way. I can always fight, and I can have a really good fight. I can go through all the techniques. I can sort of rest the blade in sort of Schlussel on the side with the arms crossed. Doesn't get in the way. Do the same with the Albion Meyer. So it's got the right name, practicing techniques from Meyer, but the darned? I'm not an American. The damned crossguard is just a little bit too much, and it bites into the arms and it just interferes a little. Now, if you're taller than me, I'm 5'9". Again, that weird thing with measurements in the UK. Usually measure height in feet and inches. Although I measure weight in kilos, as I've said before in some other videos. So we go back to the Liechtenauer, and you've got I find, anyway, the crossguard is much easier to use with techniques. It doesn't interfere. So we look at the two swords, both really nice, nicely put together. These are old. And as I said, these Just stuff falling on the floor everywhere. That's just an iPad on the floor, so hopefully it still works. So the Albion swords, they look really nice. They're great drilling swords. The Liechtenauer in particular. I think Siggy have just, no, I think, I know Siggy have just released a sword that's quite similar called the King. I know because I've ordered one and it's on its way right now. And I think they based it very much on the Liechtenauer. It's like a new generation in that it's designed to be safe for sparring, but has all of the functionality and handling of an actual longsword. So it's kind of hopefully the perfect hybrid between a longsword, a blunt longsword, and a feather. Now, in 2021, what do I think of these swords? Well, in 2021, I wouldn't buy either of these brand new for sparring. For drill, yeah, great. Although they're not cheap. If you're in the US, they're going to be quite affordable, or relatively affordable. In Europe, where I am, getting them shipped and having to pay VAT and duty on them really makes them quite expensive, especially when we have such good sword makers in the UK and the rest of Europe. So there's no desperate reason to get these over here at the moment. You could go to, Arius or Arus, however they pronounce it. You go to Siggy, you go to Kviten, go to Black Fencer, go to Malleus. They're all going to work out the same or a lot less. And you've got a whole array of different swords to choose from. But the main reasons, though, not price, as to why I would avoid them. First of all, the Meyer. I've come across numerous examples of these at events and competitions where they've taken very bad sets. So I've seen these where they bend here and they end up with a crook a third of the way down the blade, maybe even into an S, and they don't bend back. I know of many of them where the very fine tip, that's really fine, has penetrated protective gear. And there's lots of anecdotal stories of them doing the same, which is a little concerning. So you've got to obviously make sure they're protected. So you put a proper tip on there, that kind of negates that issue, but it is still very thin in the weak. And then if you go to the Liechtenauer, it's just too meaty to use for sparring these days against swords that aren't the same. So I don't think any tournament would let you, I might be wrong there, but I would think most tournaments wouldn't let you use an Albion Liechtenauer or similar. And you'd certainly be at a disadvantage if you're fighting against feathers. They're going to be not necessarily lighter, but for the given weight and dimension, the given weight, you can get something that handles, that basically cuts more quickly. And if you want it, you could even get a longer blade up to the restrictions of a tournament. So I think these two are basically, they're what they are. They're relics from the early days of, kind of the first days of pro HEMA equipment being made. I've got loads of longswords, and I've got loads more longswords coming. Some because I want them, and others because we need to review them so people in our club and people on YouTube can see what it's like and see if it's worth actually buying and using. But these two swords, they're my old sort of faithful relics. They haven't broken. They've gone into hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of fights. Me and my brother we probably had more fights against each other with these swords than a lot of people have just had at all in their HEMA career. We've just had insane fights going on forever with these swords. And because of that, I think they deserve to be retired while they still work. So they go on my sword rack. If we're doing a long sword block at the AHF, they come out to be loaners for drills, but they don't get used for sparring anymore. Their sparring days are over. They kind of have gone into early retirement with dignity, which is unusual for swords. In my experience, it either ends up being a sword you hate and you sell it, or it's a sword you love and it breaks, and then you replace it with something else. So I'm going to pop links to the swords anyway in the description. If that review sounded negative, it shouldn't sound negative. The swords were great when they came out. They're both still great if you want to just use them for drill, but I think both of them are compromised when it comes to sparring. There's loads of alternatives to the Meyer now. Loads of people are making that kind of feather style that is just as nice, maybe better, handles really well and is cheaper. The Liechtenauer, other companies are making sort of hybrid swords. I've got the Siggy King coming. It's actually shipped. In fact, I think it's shipped. I've paid for it anyway, and yeah, I'm 90% certain it's shipped. And when it arrives, I'll do a review of that, and I will compare it to the Liechtenauer and see how it works. And see, basically, has the new generation Liechtenauer improved on the old one? Because that's really what it is. And if you've got these swords still, keep using them. They're well built. But as I said, make sure you tip them. Those tips are really not safe. They're much too thin. They come from a period where everybody was experimenting and trying to find the optimal kit for HEMA. So, really, really nice swords. Limited in their use, I think, now. And especially if you're not in the US, there are similar, if not better, alternatives for the same money or less. So that's the Albion Meyer, Albion Liechtenauer. Again, any questions? I'm sure I've missed something there. But if there are any questions about either of these two swords, or any of their other weapons, I have the things like the Albion Messer, which I suppose I could have included, but I forgot. Pop a message in the comment section. Thanks for watching, and we'll get some more videos up shortly.